she told me that Jaden was... Life flew to a hospital and Zayn and Alanah were no longer there.
New courtroom footage from Fox 2 shows a Michigan mother's grief as she recalls the moment her life changed forever. The moment she woke up from a coma, confused and disoriented, only to be told her two youngest children were dead, and her oldest son had been airlifted to a hospital and he's now fighting for his life. The family was at a birthday party. They had just finished singing happy birthday when in the blink of an eye, a driver, reportedly drunk, came barreling through, slamming into families, hitting kids and adults, and cutting young lives short. The driver is now convicted of murder and may spend the rest of her life in jail. I'll walk you through the details. For Law&Crime News, I'm Kennedi Walker. What was supposed to be a joyful celebration turned into unimaginable heartbreak in Berlin Township, Michigan. For this story, we have to go back to April 20th, 2024. Picture it. You're at a child's birthday party. There's cake, balloons, bounce houses. The sounds of kids laughing and playing consumes the air. For a moment, everything seemingly normal, maybe even perfect, until it's not. But in between the moment she lost consciousness and when she woke up, the nightmare was unfolding in real time. 66-year-old Marshella Chidester had just crashed into the Swan Boat Club.
The first aid was provided to approximately 15 victims. Unfortunately, in tragedy, 2 of the victims were pronounced deceased at the scene. This includes an 8-year-old female and a 5-year-old male.
In this news conference aired by WXYZ, an emotional Sheriff Troy Gooddoe described the aftermath.
The scene was described by the first responders as extremely chaotic, with high level of emotions of those directly involved and those who witnessed this horrific incident.
15 people were injured in the crash. 9 of them, children and adults, were rushed to the hospital, some by ambulance, others by helicopter. Their injuries were severe, some life-threatening. The rest were transported by private vehicle to local hospitals. The driver, Marshella Chidester, was arrested. She was charged with 8 counts related to the incident, including 2 counts of second-degree murder and multiple counts of operating while intoxicated, causing death or serious injury. Her bond was set at $1.5 million. According to the Detroit Free Press, Chidester's attorney says his client was not drunk and only had 1 glass of wine that day. He claims his client suffers from neuropathy and had epileptic-like seizures in her legs, and the crash resulted from her blacking out as a result of a seizure. Weeks after the crash, a lawyer for 9 victims of the boat club tragedy filed a lawsuit against the driver, the Swan Boat Club, where the party was held, and Vernus Tavern, a local bar where police allege Chidester had been drinking before she got behind the wheel. The lawsuit obtained by WTVG claims the boat club failed to provide a safe environment. It argues that the building was constructed dangerously close to the roadway without guardrails, cement poles, or other safety barriers. As for Vernus Tavern, the lawsuit alleges the bar sold alcohol to Chidester while she was visibly intoxicated, a claim both the bar and Chidester deny. During the trial, Chidester's attorney argued the grandmother only had 1 glass of wine that day. That's also what the defendant told first responders in this body camera video obtained by WXYZ.
Have you been drinking at all today?
A little bit, yes.
Okay. When's the last time you had something to drink?
Probably half an hour ago.
Half an hour ago? What did you drink?
Wine.
But surveillance video from inside Chidester's own home told a different story. Chidester reportedly told investigators she just had 1 glass of wine with her lunch. An employee testified that she was at the restaurant from 11 to noon, and receipts show she did order a glass of wine. This video, which aired on Click on Detroit, was played in court. It shows that in the hours leading up to the crash, the 76-year-old walked through her kitchen, grabbing bottles, pouring glasses, and drinking. Just before 9:30 a.m., video shows Chidester holding what appears to be a mini bottle of wine as she moves around her house. By 10:45 a.m., she's tossing an empty bottle into the trash. Then at 2:10 p.m., she's drinking again. And at 2:30, just 30 minutes before she got behind the wheel, she walks into the kitchen, refills her glass, and walks away. The crash happened around 3 p.m. According to body camera video, Chidester tells first responders that she passed out.
What happened?
I passed out.
Okay. Have you been feeling ill or anything like that?
Yes.
What kind of medical conditions do you have?
Seizures.
Seizures? Okay.
Despite her claim that a seizure was to blame, they tested her blood alcohol level and it was 0.18, more than twice the legal limit. In an instant, a birthday party turned into a crime scene. Dozens of people were hurt, and Mariah Dodd, the mother who lost 2 of her children that day, was one of them.
I had a punctured lung, broken ribs, a broken shoulder blade, a hematoma on my pelvic.
Her oldest son, her only child to survive, was airlifted to a hospital. His injuries were just as severe: broken legs and ribs and a skull fracture. Today, less than 1 year after the accident, Mariah is no longer covered in bruises, but she's permanently scarred, left with a grief no mother should ever have to endure. But on March 6, 2024, she was able to feel a little relief.
Count 1, guilty of murder in the second degree of Alanah Phillips. Count 2, guilty of murder in the second degree of Zayn Phillips. Count 3, guilty of operating while intoxicated or operating while visibly impaired causing the death of Alanah Phillips. Count 4, guilty of operating while intoxicated or operating while visibly impaired causing the death of Zayn Phillips. Count 5, guilty of operating while intoxicated or operating while visibly impaired causing serious impairment of a body function to Mariah Lynn Dodds. Count 6, guilty of operating while intoxicated or operating while visibly impaired causing serious impairment of a body function to Edward Thomas Smothers. Count 7, guilty of operating while intoxicated or operating while visibly impaired causing serious impairment of a body function to Jaden Bryce Phillips. Count 8, guilty of operating while intoxicated or operating while visibly impaired causing serious impairment of a body function to Leah Marie Stiff. And count 9, guilty of operating while intoxicated or operating while visibly impaired causing serious impairment of a body function to Diane Virginia Medina.
Jurors took about 90 minutes to find Chidester guilty on all counts. And joining me to talk more about this story is legal expert Zayn Phillips. John, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you, Kennedi.
So let's just dive right in. From a victim's rights perspective, how significant is this case in terms of legal precedent?
You know, justice is spelled one way, but it's defined many different ways. You have the criminal justice system, which victims tend to want to get it right. You want the conviction first as a family member of somebody injured or killed. Then you have the civil justice system and the court of public opinion, and both of those tend to be working, in tandem now. And it all starts with this. It all starts with a conviction and then a sentencing and then getting past appeal. But that's usually the preeminent hallmark of justice that families and victims want.
What specific rights do the victims and their families have in a case like this?
Right. So from the standpoint of, the state of Michigan is the one who prosecutes cases. Each state is a little different, but you do have Marsy's Law in multiple states that gives victims some rights to be heard, some rights to be consulted by prosecutors and at least weigh in on how the criminal case is going. But they really don't have full rights until it's the civil case. But the civil case tends to only be about money. And, certainly justice is more than dollars and cents. But, it just kind of depends on the role and the prosecutor and the victim's advocates at the prosecutor's office as to what, role that the families had. I know the family of the parents of the 2 children were pretty heavily involved here and even did a press conference after the verdict talking about going and visiting his 4-year-old and 8-year-old who passed away and letting them know that, phase 1 of justice worked.
And let's talk more about that, just the civil trial. We know that a lot of them, of the victims, have come together and they filed civil lawsuits against just where the accident happened, against the restaurant where they say that the defendant was at before the crash happened. Can you just explain that whole process for those that don't know? How does all of this work?
Right. So, usually you want the criminal case to be over with before you can really get to the civil process. People think of O.J. Simpson, right? So he was acquitted in his murder case, but then they found him guilty, for wrongful death, and assessed him damages, and it usually needs to go in that order so as not to compromise the Fifth Amendment and the constitutional criminal rights of the accused. So essentially, you file a lawsuit here, and I know we're going to get into it more, but here you want to sue the person that caused it, right? But oftentimes they don't have a whole lot of assets, or they can bankrupt out of it, and so here they look to see who else might have legal liability, and in a restaurant that she visited, that served her drinks was one of the potential defendants. I think they also, looked at kind of the security of the parking lot where this happened. I know in the past we've sued when a car intruded into a building because of a lack of bollards. The big poles that you see outside a facility that helps
Right.
keep cars from entering. It all just depends on the layout of the parking lot and how close they are to traffic. But it's the goal now to try to find who's negligent and recover money for these families, but also, insurance companies, big companies, they all learn from hard lessons. Getting hit, $1 million verdict will teach a lesson, way quicker than no civil justice whatsoever.
And we know that this case is involving drinking and driving. In cases involving DUI crashes, how do victims' rights differ from other types of violent crimes?
Yeah, it's from the criminal standpoint, it's the intoxication that kept it as murder rather than vehicular homicide. It was charged as murder because of her recklessness. She was well over twice the legal limit. Somebody who was drinking from early in the morning, filmed herself drinking, not intentionally, but through all of our cameras that we have around us. And that pours, no pun intended, into the civil case because, in most states, and I think Michigan, one of them, you can add punitive damages when you have a level of gross neglect. And certainly somebody drinking all day, getting behind the wheel and running into a building is not just simple negligence, but gross negligence. So it kind of added the level of intoxication added to the charges on the criminal side, and it equally can add to the nature of the negligence and gross negligence on the civil side.
And we know that the defendant was found guilty on all counts. How many years do you think that she should get? And then we also know that she's in her late 70s as well. Do you think that that'll play a part?
Yeah, I mean, in two factors. One, courts look and want to charge. I mean, they have to legally charge somebody with a sentence that's commensurate with the crime. And here you have a 4-year-old and an 8-year-old who lost their lives, and others who were injured. And at her age, not to be callous about it, but pretty much any significant sentence is a death sentence. It is a sentence, not a death sentence, but a life imprisonment sentence. It will keep her long past her life expectancy. And so, whereas in some cases, if this was a 20-year-old who did this, you might look at a 20-year sentence and say, well, that's not enough. They'll be out when they're 40. But, at her age, any sentence of 25, 30 years certainly would put her past her life expectancy. But I still believe, under kind of Michigan sentencing guidance, with 2 count degree murder plus other charges, she's looking at spending the rest of her life in jail.
Do you think that that's something that the defense can bring up or argue, on her behalf, that because of her age, it should be a lesser sentence, or no?
I think so. The defendant, first has to get through, at sentencing, essentially, you're gonna throw everything you can at the wall. There's usually a sentencing memorandum that'll discuss, whether you have a prior history for crime. I don't think she had a significant history, and they can plead to the mercy of the court about alcoholism or about what caused this. You can kind of get into the mental capacity or psychological incapacity, the disability. People hate to use that word around alcoholism, but to the extent that was an issue here, they will try to use it to take away some time. Age will also take away some time potentially. But I just think with the nature of it being 2 murder convictions, that there's no way you can take enough time that isn't going to ostensibly be a life sentence.
Now, the jury convicted the defendant on all counts in just about 90 minutes. Does that speed suggest overwhelming evidence, or could it create grounds for an appeal, which is something that her attorney said that they're looking into?
That was the immediate quote out of her attorney. His first quote was, I can't criticize the judge, but he ruled against me on 8 out of 9 motions or whatever it was. And then second, he was critical about the time. And he also quoted the adage in criminal defense cases, the quicker the jury's out, the more they all see something on the same page. And you often see convictions in cases like this with a quick verdict, because a jury wants it to be pretty clear that justice needs to be had, and there was no delay about it. And even though he was critical over the nature of the evidence introduced, it all laid out a timeline of intoxication that, ended with her driving her car into a child's birthday party. And no matter how strongly he wishes that there would have been an acquittal here or lesser charges, the facts speak for themselves. She was drinking all day. She was 2x plus the legal limit, and got behind the wheel and caused massive harm and death when she did.
Now, the defense is also arguing that she has a medical condition that causes seizures. Do you think that could work in the appeal?
It can. There's laws on the civil side where people can have less liability when they're undergoing a spontaneous medical event. You see it. We had a case recently where a driver left work and he tripled up on his pain medication the night before and fell asleep at the wheel and T-boned a car. And they tried to kind of pull the same thing, that this was a medical event. Well, it was, but the medical event happened a long time before. And at some point, you still got to know better. If you're taking drugs or alcohol, there is a risk that it's going to cause seizures. There is a risk that you're going to have, comorbidities that stem from the alcohol itself. But for the alcohol, would she have had a seizure if she had a seizure? And so, as a defense attorney, you're going to, both civil and criminal, you're going to throw whatever you can at the wall, whatever laws you can to support. The adage in law school, if the facts are on your side, argue the facts. If the law's on your side, argue the facts. And if neither are on your side, just argue. They're gonna argue however they can, because again, their client's life is ostensibly at stake for being in prison.
Right. Well, break this down for us. The defendant was charged with second-degree murder. Why that charge instead of vehicular manslaughter? And what's the legal distinction?
Right. If she was sober and hit a pedestrian fatally, or sober and maybe drove, at a rate of speed that caused her to collide with this building, that's typically where you'd see vehicular manslaughter. You have a non-intended homicide. And by, the founding fathers up to now, we didn't want to call that murder. It was more accidental than not. Here, people think of classic first degree murder, which this wasn't. It wasn't premeditated. She wasn't trying to wipe out everybody at the birthday party, right? So the next thing under that is a level of extreme disregard or reckless indifference. And that's what ultimately she was convicted of, because she drank from 9 a.m. on and went to a bar and got behind the wheel. And our laws have to stigmatize that activity as strongly as possible, because one, it cost 2 lives, and 2, others need to look at this case and learn from it and say, look, getting behind the wheel can have horrifying effects. And no matter what happens with the criminal or civil justice system, it won't bring those 2 children back.
And we were just talking about the possibility for appeals like a couple of questions ago, but I have to ask, will it not happen really? As soon as prosecutors present the video evidence of the defendant drinking throughout the day, will that just not make it possible?
Yeah, I didn't watch the trial, and so I don't know the 8 rulings that he felt went poorly for him. Oftentimes trials are made up of moments, and the overall story you're not going to change. It's should this portion of the story or this portion of the story or this juror or this evidence been involved. And I don't know what his 8 issues are, or if he properly preserved them. You've got to object timely. Sometimes you got to state the objection. It just depends on how the court's operating its courtroom. But I suspect some of those are going to involve things that he thinks warrant a new trial because it wasn't fair under the rules of evidence and procedure. And lawyers are going to lawyer. Even if somebody has a public defender, they have the right to an appeal. And when you take on a criminal case that a little bit of discovery, a little bit of questioning will tell you, oof, my client's really facing some bad facts here. You just got to do your best to keep the system honest.
And let's talk about Michigan law specifically. How does Michigan law treat cases where a drunk driver kills multiple people compared to states with stricter DUI sentencing laws?
Yeah, Michigan seems to get it right from the criminal's perspective, classifying this as murder, which is our highest classification as society of, there's capital murder, which is a death penalty crime. But under that, this wasn't premeditated. Second degree murder is a life felony. And it stigmatizes drinking, and where laws get it wrong across the country, and I'm licensed in 8 states, is often the consequences of a DUI and the ability to get it tossed down to reckless driving. You're not going to see that when there's multiple fatalities. They're going to take it seriously, and the same goes for the civil side. You get caught up as a civil lawyer, and most of what we do is victims advocacy in the civil courts. But you want to see, you're fighting insurance coverage issues sometimes that exclude crimes, that exclude, wanton or intentional acts, which this really wasn't. But, the car insurance, for instance, that she had, sometimes will pay. Sometimes they'll say, no, she was intoxicated and intoxicated to the point she was committing a crime, and they'll deny it. So, all of this stuff kind of hinges on the level of intoxication, which again was double here, and the damages caused, which was, double fatality plus.
And going back to the civil lawsuits as well, we mentioned that the victims' families have filed a civil lawsuit against the defendant, the boat club, and Vernus Tavern. We talked about the legal responsibilities of the boat club, but what about the legal responsibilities of the restaurant in this case?
Yeah, it's interesting, and I don't know the precise facts, but my understanding is she drank, then she went to a restaurant, and then she got behind the wheel, and what the main litigation seemed to be in the criminal case was piecing the videos together to try to add up 0.18 or 0.19, whatever she blew, which again in most states 0.07, 0.08, 0.09. Half of that is the legal limit. So she was well over 2x, and where the law is on civil cases isn't just because you served a drink you're negligent, but it's different levels. And I know we're going to get into this, but different levels of dram shop liability. And dram shop is just kind of the old term for serving alcohol, and every state is massively different. In Florida, to have liability on a bar or restaurant, you have to serve a known drunkard. You have to serve somebody that you know is habitually consuming alcohol in mass quantities. In Michigan, it's easier in that you have to serve somebody that was intoxicated or was reasonably past the point where they should be, where their faculties are visibly impaired, and again that's a tough issue. I've been to Michigan. I've been to sports games in Michigan, and people get plenty drunk in Michigan just like they do anywhere in the country. And bars have parking lots, and so it's not up to a bar or restaurant to ensure the safety of every single person that has a beer. But when you have somebody drunk coming and sitting at a bar, you got to be responsible under the law too. You can't just keep serving them and say, well, just drive away, it's fine.
Right. And the lawsuit claims that the restaurant served the defendant alcohol while she was visibly intoxicated. But I guess a big question that I see people asking is just how exactly do they prove that? Even though they have the videos of her throughout the day, how do they prove that the server or the bartender noticed that she was visibly intoxicated?
It's tough, because the bartender testified here, and while everybody kind of wants to cooperate for purposes of police and prosecutors doing their job, you also got to be careful. And the Fifth Amendment actually protects the civil litigation as well, incriminating statements that could create civil liability. But it's a little bit of a double-edged sword in that you can, if the bartender is going to testify that she was intoxicated, the restaurant bar's lawyer is going to say, well, hold on, wait a minute. We don't want civil liability either. So, unless somebody is significantly slurring, which could have an excuse, or, stumbling, which again could have an excuse. Sometimes those cases are the hardest. In Florida, they're really hard because, again, it's the habitual drunkard that the law focuses on, not somebody that's just intoxicated one time, unless it's a minor. Both Michigan and Florida go after minors pretty hard, serving minors. But it really gets into the objective, and cameras tend to tell part of that story.
And lastly, you can take a lot from this case, but what lessons should lawmakers take from this to strengthen protections for victims of DUI crashes?
And that's a great question. I'm going to end where I started, which is justice is spelled one way. But one of the things when a family comes into our office is we ask them, what is justice to them? And in a violence case, in a death case where somebody took a life, it always is criminal justice. They want to see that person face the system. And then there's civil justice. That's typically why they hire us in the court of public opinion, to the extent it's a media case controlling the narrative. But whether it's a child who died in a hot car death, or whether it's a DUI, there's families that take a look at these cases and say, we've got to do more. We've got to do better. There are gaps in the law. Whether Miss Chidester was addicted to alcohol or had a bad day, either way, we can't stigmatize drunk driving enough, in my opinion, because it takes lives every single day. I think every single hour, if you look at Mothers Against Drunk Driving stats. And we can't just let that go. And I don't know that Michigan has, from what I've reviewed, an area of the law that needs strengthening. But you always, after a loss, want to do what you can as a family to make sure that the children didn't die in vain, that the victim didn't die in vain. And so you want to do everything you can to strengthen the laws and to make sure that other people learn from your loss.
Great. Well, thank you so much, John, for coming on. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Chidester's sentencing is set for May 15th. Her attorney says he plans on appealing. For Law and Crime, I'm Kennedi Walker.